Welcome everybody to week 3 of OMG Tuesdays, Life Together, looking at the book of Acts. And today we've got a full chapter, Acts 10, but I wanted to start with a bit of a review of last week. So last week we explored Acts chapter 4 and some of the highlights from that. We looked at the unity of heart and soul. That's a quote among these new believers of Jesus. We also looked at the ways in which they were in a new way that made people notice that they were sharing possessions and money and food. And probably as a result of that, we're told that none of them were in need in a kind of physical sense. Today, after Michael in week 1, me in week 2, and then me here in week 3, we transitioned from a kind of focus on the disciples' life together, as disciples, let's say, to the overflow of that life to the world around them. And I'm going to read, I've given us the whole of chapter 10, which is long, and if I read that whole thing, that'll be my whole 15 minutes, so I won't do that. But I'm going to read a portion of it, and you're welcome to follow along in the handouts that would have come. And I'll give a bit of a kind of summary of what happens before and after our text. So we start off hearing about a Roman soldier, a centurion, whose name is Cornelius. And we're told that he's devout, that he is not Jewish, he's Gentile, but that he is a God-fearer. It's a kind of technical term, that he fears God and he's very generous. And he has a vision one day that his prayers and his generosity has been received by God as a kind of offering, and that he should send people to go find this guy called Peter and just listen to whatever he tells you. So Cornelius sends this delegation. They're on their way. At the same time, and you can almost picture this like a movie, at the same time, Peter is up on his roof praying, and he's starving. He's really hungry, and he has this vision of this sheet being lowered, and on the sheet are all the different non-kosher foods that from the time he was a small Jewish kid, he's never ever been allowed to eat. And it comes down in this vision, and it happens 3 times, and the voice says to him in the vision, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." And he says, "No, I'm not doing that. I've never done that. I'm a religious Jew. I'm not going to do that." And here's what happens next. Now, while Peter was greatly puzzled about what to make of this vision that he had seen, suddenly the men sent by Cornelius appeared. They were asking for Simon's house and were standing by the gate. They called out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Look, 3 men are searching for you. Now get up, go down, and go with them without hesitation, for I have sent them." So Peter went down to the men and said, "I'm the one you're looking for. What is the reason for your coming?" They answered, "Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and to hear what you have to say." So Peter invited them in and gave them lodging. The next day he got up and went with them, and some of the believers from Joppa accompanied him. The following day they came to Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. On Peter's arrival, Cornelius met him and, falling at his feet, worshipped him. But Peter made him get up, saying, "Stand up, I'm only a mortal." And as he talked with him, he went in and found that many had assembled. And he said to them, You yourselves know that it is unlawful for a Jew to associate with or to visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. Now may I ask why you sent for me? And they go on to relate the vision that Cornelius had, and Peter goes on to proclaim the gospel to them. And shocker of shockers, the Holy Spirit comes and falls on this Gentile and all these that are gathered with him. And they're speaking in tongues, and people hear God in their language. Exactly that had just happened with the other Jews on Pentecost. And Peter moves and suggests that they get baptized. I want to share just a few things here to stimulate our speaking. And the first thing I want to do is share just a different tab here that I've put together for you today that you might find helpful. That coming through all right? So something to think of side by side here, like this is how my brain thinks. But if you look at these two encounters as we're about to head into our discussions, on one hand, you've got Cornelius and his entourage. On the other hand, you've got Peter. So you've got Cornelius, who's a Gentile, and for our purposes, that just means non-Jewish, whereas you have Peter, who's a Jew. You have Cornelius, who is a Roman soldier, and Peter, who is a disciple of Jesus. You have Cornelius, who's someone who fears God. You have Peter, who's a faithful Jew. Cornelius, his vision happens at the 9th hour. Peter's at the 6th. Cornelius has a vision that his offering has been accepted, and the vision just sort of comes to him once, whereas this vision that Peter has of kill and eat these so-called dirty animals happens to him 3 times. We have a delegation of Cornelius that goes to visit Peter, and then we have a delegation, or basically Peter, that goes to visit Cornelius. We have Cornelius who commands. I looked up how many soldiers a centurion looked after, and it's 80. So this guy was the boss of 80 soldiers. And here Peter is gathered with Cornelius and his family and friends, given an audience. They both give a testimony about a way that they've experienced God. And we see with Cornelius this obvious way in which the Holy Spirit shows up. And we get the sense with Peter, as he's sharing some of his story, that he recognizes he needs to kind of get out of the way because the Holy Spirit is coming along and doing something in a new way, we might say. So you may find that helpful kind of going into discussion, and just to share a few other observations on this fascinating passage. So honestly, Acts 10 is one of those exemplary passages for why or how Christianity overflowed the dam and it went global. God had to speak to both Gentile and Jew, and both had to receive and listen to one another. And I was thinking about this in a very real way. If Cornelius and Peter don't offer hospitality to each other and hear each other out and their respective experiences of God, in a very real way, if that doesn't happen, Christianity just remains a Jewish sect that dies off. We also see here, it's not the first time in the book of Acts. It happens earlier with the Ethiopian eunuch, but it is a significant time where this God of Israel, this God of the Jewish people, is speaking here not only to Cornelius, but also through Cornelius to Peter. And in this particular case of the centurion, just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, although he is described here as a friend of the Jewish people and generous, and we should take all that at its word, it's also possible that others would have seen him as part of the occupying military force. So this may be not dissimilar from if you're an Iraqi and the US armed forces are there against your will, and you're being asked to receive a commander of 80 of those people into your home, and they want to tell you something about God. So just to give a little bit of the politics of the stakes here, because not only were Jews, as Peter says, forbidden from eating with Gentiles, but here they could particularly be seen to actually sort of dine and eat and fellowship with someone who might be perceived as an enemy. Another thing to point out, both of these men really had to go all in on what their respective vocation was in order to hear the word of the Lord. There's an account in the Gospels elsewhere where Jesus encounters a centurion, not Cornelius, and this centurion, what he's used to doing is kind of ordering people around, go here, go there. And Jesus says, you know, I haven't even seen in Israel among the Jews someone who understands things as well as this guy does. And so here we see Cornelius sending people, directing people, sending a delegation like a centurion would. And we have Peter, who's remaining kosher. And the revelation from God to each of them comes not from them, I think, backing off their respective commitments, like Peter, but actually somehow leaning fully into them, recognizing the tension and what might be at stake, and somehow coming out the other side into something new. For instance, we don't have Peter saying, this stuff doesn't matter anymore. It's him trying to reckon with, no, this matters. This is the way I've been raised all the way till now, and I'm trying to understand if there's a different way to see this. And the hinge practice here, because partly we're trying to locate these weeks in what are the practices or what makes this distinct, is around testimony. And there is something here in both what the centurion says and what Peter has to say about their personal encountered lived experience with God that is actually changing the lives of the people around them. Last thing I'll say before handing over to you, it's not that God goes off script, but there is a sense in the book of Acts, and in particular in this passage, where God goes beyond the script. And what I mean by that is Peter had to reckon, just to look at it from his point of view for a minute, he had to reckon with one of the fundamental ways that Jews marked themselves off as distinct was by different dietary laws. I eat that, I don't eat that. And especially in a world where things were hostile to them, that was one of the ways that the Jews differentiated themselves and found their unique identity as God's people. Here, Peter has to reckon with the script of that, the scriptures of that, and somehow this vision that he believes is God, and then Cornelius telling him that, yes, and even though I am not a Jew and I don't keep those dietary laws, God is still showing up in my life. And Peter is so convinced that in that moment of the Spirit coming, he wants them to be baptized. And so, again, not that God goes off script, but there's a way that they're improvising in a way, kind of like with jazz music, where you've got the melody line, but people go in and around and through it and back and forth to come up with, the harmonies.